Right. So, welcome to the Young Foreign Lawyer Profile Series. My name is Parviz Malakouti. Of course, I am an immigration lawyer and I love interviewing other lawyers, especially other foreign lawyers. And today we have a domestic lawyer that is also or is aspiring to become also a foreign lawyer. We have Mark White here. He's going to tell us how somebody becomes a lawyer in France and particularly how a foreigner, a non-Frenchman, becomes a lawyer in France. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. So we'll get right into it, Mark. Mark, you know that about 5, 6 months ago, I recorded an interview with one of my French lawyer friends about how a person becomes a lawyer in France, a French person. And we got some interest from people who wanted to know about how a foreigner becomes a lawyer in France because the process is different. And luckily, I have a friend, you, who has gone through the process. So let's get right into Article 100. What does the term Article 100 mean to you?
Well, Article 100 is a means by which foreign lawyers can get admitted to the bar in France. And Article 100 is for lawyers who originate from countries outside the European Union. There's also Article 99, which are for lawyers who originate within the European Union, and the rules are different and actually more lax, as you'd imagine.
Okay, right. And then, of course, there's the regular process whereby just a regular French person becomes a lawyer in France.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, great. So you have taken the Article 100 exam, correct?
That's correct. I took it in March in Paris.
Okay, great. So I guess we'll start by talking about what are the requirements to even apply to take the Article 100 exam?
The requirements are that you are a lawyer who's admitted to practice law in good standing in a country, or in the case of the United States, in a state that offers reciprocity to French attorneys. So in other words, that they have the same rights to become an attorney in your country or your state as you do in theirs. I'm an attorney in California, and in theory, California has reciprocity with France. I don't think that's exactly true, but it really doesn't matter to me because the French accepted that California does, and therefore allowed me to take the bar exam. In a sense, the requirements are not the same because in California, to become a lawyer, I believe you would have to graduate from a school in California or a ABA approved school in the United States, and then take the regular bar exam as everyone else. To become an attorney in France, you just need to show the requirements that I previously mentioned and take their bar. So in other words, I do not have to get a diploma from a French law school.
Right, and that's huge, right? Obviously, because somebody doesn't have to spend 1 or 2 or 3 years working on a degree. So, okay, so you're a California lawyer. I'm also a California lawyer. So ostensibly, being licensed in California, we can sign up for the French bar exam, the Article 100 exam. You have to know French as well,
yeah.
Obviously, right? The bar exam is given in French, correct?
Yeah, the bar exam's in French, and all of the legal trials and everything else you have to do are required to be in French. So yes, you must speak and write it fluently.
Okay, great. So first of all, how many times per year is it given?
It's given twice per year. It's given once in Paris and then in Versailles, which is a suburb of Paris, basically.
Okay, great. So you took the one in March. That was the Paris one, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And right about now should be, I guess, the next one in Versailles, correct?
Yeah, I don't know the exact dates, but yeah, it would be next month.
Okay, right. So sometime in November. Okay. How much did it cost you to sign up for the exam?
It is $1,000, basically. It is 900 euros. So to get the approval to take the exam is free. But once you have the approval and you actually want to take it, then you have to pay the 900 euros.
Okay.
There's more to the process, though. I also had to pay a translator because the documents which I wrote up to send to get permission to take the bar also had to be translated into French. So those would be my diploma, my certificate of good standing from California, and they have to be translated by a certified translator. So that cost me an additional, I think it was $260.
Okay, so the only 2 documents you sent were your diploma and your certificate of good standing, and then of course the French language translations of the same?
Yeah, along with a demand letter There is no form to fill out. And they say this kind of clearly. In fact, it's kind of a mystery how to get through this whole process. There's a little bit of information online, but mostly I figured it out by talking to friends who had taken this before, and who I'm basically emailing the Council National de Barreau, which is basically the organization that receives the requests and approves of whether candidates can take the exam or not. So yeah, there is no form. So I basically had to write them a letter in all the proper flowery French that goes into formal letters, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and basically say who I am, what my qualifications are, and what I wanted along with my diploma and the certificate of good standing, and proof that California offers reciprocity to French candidates, which seemed like a mystery to me, because what would that proof be? I have to send them the entire California code. When I emailed them and asked them the question, they politely responded saying that there was a treaty, telling me which treaty and which section of the treaty provided for that. So I basically just copied and pasted that into my demand letter, and said I named the woman who had provided me with information, and that was enough.
Okay, perfect. So let's work in a backwards timeline. You took the exam in March of 2019. When did you have to send all that documentation by in order to qualify for the March 2019 exam?
So I sent the information in right about this time of year, which is mid-October. So they have to reach a decision. They need 6 weeks to look over your package, and they have to reach a decision, I think, before the last. They have a council meeting every month, and in which they review all the requests. And I think the last one was at the end of November, and so that would be the last chance to approve me before the end of the year, which is basically the deadline to approve the candidates for the Article 100 exam.
Okay, so were you given an actual deadline to send the package by, or did you just know that it has to be roughly at least 6 weeks before that meeting?
The website for the Council National de Barreau, it has this information. So the information they do have, which is limited, does tell you that you have to get this in before the last council meeting, and they also say to you too that to get this in as soon as possible. I mean, don't wait till last minute. I mean, if you intend to take it, send it in by the summer would be relaxed. But I mine wasn't last minute. It was they took a while to approve me, but since I sent it in mid-October, that was sufficient time for them. So.
Okay, got it. Did you have to find all that information in French, or are they kind enough to have an English language webpage for that?
I think they have it in English. I can't remember. I read it in French because I sort of, whenever I found this stuff, I don't know how it's going to be translated. I was afraid somebody might mistranslate it. I knew if I was reading it in French, I'd get the real information. And, in theory, if I'm going to be taking the bar anyways, I should be able to read all this stuff in French. So.
Right, exactly. Okay, so you send that in October, okay? And forgive me if you already said, but when did you find out that you were approved to apply to take the bar?
I found out in early December. So it kind of took a while, and I had to bug them as well.
Okay.
Now, another thing you have to have is you have to have an address in France, a PO box, something where you can receive mail. This I saw in two places, different information on this. One place said you have to have the PO box. The other place said no, they'll send it to whatever address in whatever country you live in. I played it safe and I got the PO box. It cost me about €7 a month with a company called Courrier du Voyage. Okay. And
we'll put that in the description of the video too for everybody listening. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll send you the link. And I think they charged me about €7 a month. And then whenever they weren't located in Paris, they were down in the south of France because that was cheaper. And whenever they got a letter, I would get an email, and for I think 20 cents a page, they would scan in whatever I got and email it to me.
Okay, very nice. So you set yourself up with an address and mail. You find out early in December that you're approved for the go-ahead. What was your very next step to prepare for the exam?
Well, actually, I started early to prepare for the exam. I started in July last year. Basically, it was my first time taking an exam in French in a foreign country, and a bar on top of that, which is known to be difficult in your own language. So I knew French people, in fact, who did take this foreigner exam. because they got licensed in America first, who told me they only studied about 2 or 3 months. I am one of those people starts everything way early, so I actually started in July.
Okay.
And I wasn't exactly sure what to study, to be honest with you. It's a little humorous because when you get your convocation, which is your invitation to go to the exam, I'm skipping ahead. You get that about 6 weeks before the exam. It gives you a list of about 100 books they recommend reading in order to prepare for the exam 6 weeks ahead. So that was useless, and by that point, obviously, I'd been studying since July. So what I did first is a buddy of mine, a French guy who was licensed first in California, then took the Article 100 exam, took me to a bookshop here in Paris, and basically recommended to me which books to go through and study. I started on them, and I can get it as detailed as you want. I mean, this was something I lived for a few months, so I can totally nerd out on everything I did. But essentially, they have here kind of Cliff Notes versions of things to study.
Why don't we do this? Sorry to interrupt, Mark. Why don't we
Yeah.
put in the description of the video the top 5 to 10 books that you thought were helpful for the exam, and I'll just list them in the notes so we don't have to go over every single one of them.
Sure, but yeah, basically it was a combination of those Cliff Notes and basically doing the real studying, which was, for instance, for commercial law. I got a real commercial law textbook and I read the whole thing and I made notes.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
Okay, great. Is there any one book in particular that you thought really was head and shoulders above the others in terms of helping you with your preparation?
No, the LexiFiche were the Cliff Notes equivalents that I used. I thought they were excellent, really good reviews. I made my own flashcards. But the essential, there are a few books on the deontology, which is basically the ethics code. There's one that's really thin. It's only 200 pages. That's the shortest. And I'll give you also the link for that. But that would be the one I recommend for deontology, because basically you're stuck with 5,000 page books. So
Okay, fantastic. Let's get into the subjects actually. So I'm sure people, if somebody's thinking about doing this, they want to know what they have to study exactly. So what can you tell us about the subjects and the structure of the exam for foreigners?
There are 4 parts. There are 2 written parts, and then there are 2 oral parts. The written parts, the first part is you have to write up something called a conclusion. And basically the entire French legal system is based around this document. And it's equivalent to, let's say, a trial brief if you're an attorney. So in other words, to start a case in France, you would file this. It's your complaint, except different from a complaint. You're attaching your evidence. You're making your arguments. You're citing which law you're using. Basically, that's what you file initially. And the defense will respond with one, and they'll go back and forth on conclusion until the judge d'instruction feels that the case is ready for trial. And if you don't know what the instructing judge basically is, it's different from the American system. There is no real discovery process here. There's a judge that's appointed, and he basically decides when there's enough evidence to try the case. And if he or she feels there's something missing, he will ask for depositions or other proof or ask for discovery. So it makes the system a lot more efficient. But it's these conclusions that go back and forth. So you have to write one up. It's similar to on the California exam. There's a performance section. I can't remember. I took this exam in 2005. But in a sense, so what I was given a package, a case, a file, has previously filed conclusions, maybe, or it has some evidence. It has, I basically have anywhere from, in the practice exams, I looked at 30 pages of in this file to over 100. Now, bear in mind, you have 3 hours to do this whole exam. So you basically you have 90 minutes or half the time to go through this file and figure out what's important and come up with your argument. You then have to write up the conclusion by hand. And much of what they're testing you on is the format. So you have to memorize what order things are presented, the flowery French language, all of that. You know, it gets easy. I did it so many times, but that's the first written part. The second written part is you get to choose from 4 subjects. I believe the 4 subjects are criminal law, labor law, commercial law, and there was a 4th one. I don't remember. I chose commercial law. And in that case, that's the most similar to the kind of exams you had in law school. So in other words, you're given a fact pattern, and you basically have to tell your client what you think about his or her case, arguing both sides. So in other words, this is where you do the IRAC stuff, the issue, rule, analysis, conclusion, back and forth based on what you've used. In both cases, in both parts of the written exam, you're allowed to use the code. And the reason you're allowed to use the code is they realize it's idiocy to make you memorize all this stuff, that real attorneys in real life will be accessing this and looking up the law. They want to make sure you know how to do that. Right. So it may not, when you're studying for this exam, it's not necessarily you're memorizing things, the law. There are some things you'll need to memorize because you're short on time, but mainly you got to know how to use the code. So anyway, so those are the two written parts. The oral part, one is la déontologie. Again, that's the ethics code. You are before a panel of 3 people. You have 20 minutes, and they will basically ask you whatever regarding deontology. Now, it says when you sign up, it's mainly about deontology, but and that they may ask you about some other stuff. But in reality, they ask you about deontology. I never heard of anyone being asked anything different. The second oral part is basically on procedure, and it's civil procedure, criminal procedure, administrative procedure, and organization of the judiciary here in France. As to which one you get, it's chosen at random during the exam, so you have to study all 4 and have all 4 codes with you. Right. They picked when I went into the exam. I got criminal procedure.
Okay. By the way, that seems to be a popular way of doing things in France, because I remember when I was in my semester at University of Versailles, I had to do one of the same things for one of my final exams. I picked a straw from one of 4 topics, and I had to present on that topic, and of course study for all 4. And that was an oral presentation as well. So as you're speaking, I'm having flashbacks. Yeah, great. Okay, so those are the topics, and then the order of the exam. What can you tell us about when you find out the order and how your experience was actually taking the exam?
The written part's always the first day. Everybody has it together, and there were 205 people taking the Article 100 exam, which is huge. There are way too many, so everyone gets that the first day. The morning is the conclusion, which, by the way, is in civil law. I forgot to mention that. And the afternoon is the second written part of the part of your choice. The room's divided up by whatever you chose. The oral part, you get in your letter in the mail, the convocation. Basically will say what time your oral interviews are, and that could be whenever over the next 2 or 3 days, over the next 2 days. Now, to get into the experience of the exam, I have, it was a complete mess on the part of the testing center. And I don't think I've ever told you the story. So wow. It was incredibly poorly run. So the morning we go in for the conclusion, we're given this package. It's 120 pages, fine, I expected it. And also we have to write up something called the conclusion en réplique, which is basically, it's not one of the first conclusions I filed, but a later one. And according to French law, when you're filing a later conclusion, you have to recap all the stuff you've written before, all your arguments, a law, etc. So in other words, they're trying to test us on how efficiently we can use our time with such a large file. The file says that we're supposed to represent Société X, or basically Company X. About halfway through the exam, if you can imagine, a room of 200 people, the woman in charge interrupts us all and tells us that there's been a little error during the exam and that she needs to correct it. Now, first of all, I've never ever had this happen in all my university years in America, where somebody would interrupt the exam in the middle and tell us there's a mistake. But anyways, we were it said that we were supposed to represent company X, but in reality, that was an error. We were supposed to represent the completely opposite party, company
Oh,
Y.
okay. Interesting.
Yeah, and the room basically erupted into chaos. I mean, coming from taking all my tests in the United States, where everything is very clamped down and very, secure about preventing cheating and everything, it's not at all like that in France. I mean, everyone just started talking to each other at that point. Some people were checking their cell phones, but mainly everyone was vigorously complaining and very upset. And I'm sitting in the back, so I can barely hear what this woman's saying. What are we supposed to be doing? The room was in chaos for a good 10-15 minutes while the lady in charge had to call the guy who wrote the exam, had to call the head of the EFB, which is the organization that was giving the exam. And then we were told one thing. We were told, okay, well, if you've already started on company X, keep going with company X.
Oh my gosh.
But if you want to do company Y, that's fine too. And then more people complained. And then finally they said, okay, well, I'll tell you what, we're going to restart the clock and everybody do company Y like the exam was originally designed for.
Oh
So we're already 90 minutes through, and don't forget, we've got another exam in the afternoon, and they're restarting the clock at 3 hours.
Fatigue must have been a big factor. My goodness.
Yeah, it was a big factor. And so anyways, the room settles down again. Everybody's quiet. Everyone's restarting the exam. And then she interrupts the exam again to tell us une petite précision. I don't think I need to translate that, but we're all like, what now? Yeah.
Right.
And she says, if you want to represent company Z, you can do that too. And we're all like, company Z, there's only like a little thing in here about that. Like, and why are you telling us this now? Then about 2 hours later, with about an hour left on the newly reset clock, she interrupts the exam again and says that we're missing a page, and that they're going to hand out the page that we're missing.
Wow.
So again, it's bedlam. She hands out this page. I look at it. I crumple it up. I throw it on the floor because I've already been in there 4.5 hours at this point.
Wow.
Done. So anyways, that was how the conclusion went. And then the afternoon exam was the commercial exam. We barely had time for lunch. They told us we only had half an hour. So I basically ran down the street to a boulangerie to get a quick sandwich and a coffee. And I ran back. And then it turned out we had 90 minutes. So after all, for a full lunch. So whatever. Second exam, written exam went smoothly. And, it was a late night. I think I got out of there about 7 p.m. after arriving at like 8 a.m. And the second exam went fine, and actually felt pretty confident coming. I got through it all, answered everything, no problem. So I thought, tell you that later. Anyways, the next day I had to come back for the oral exam in the afternoon. This was the deontology. I'm not sure how much detail you want me to give about the exam, but basically there were about 4 or 5 rooms, people waiting outside in their business suits, and I'm told which room to go to, and at a specific time I was called in. The first exam was for la déontologie, the ethics code. They were very nice. It was 2 gentlemen and a lady. They are known to be very mean to you in these French oral exams, which actually I didn't know till afterwards, which is coming later. Anyways, these people, they were very nice. And they asked me a few questions, what I thought about the process of having a judge, instructing judge as compared to the American system. They asked me about disinterestedness. There was one funny part. They didn't like the answer I gave to disinterestedness. And when I looked it up after, it turned out I was right. So I was a little worried about that part, but I ended up passing that part, no problem. The next day, one last thing on the deontology part. Yeah, they were pretty friendly. They were asking me what my intentions were for France or whatever, and yeah, I enjoyed it.
Let me butt in quickly on the deontology part. Were they asking you about your intentions for France as part of the exam, or was that an aside?
I think it's an aside, but honestly, you never know. I mean, it's so subjective. I mean, here I spent all this time studying deontology, and I get asked basically a few questions over 20 minutes, and I mean, heck, who knows? A lot of it depends on how much they like you, and I
Hmm.
mean, not to pick on the French, but and part of this might be, how much they felt toward me. I mean,
Gotcha.
who knows? Who knows? But anyways, I tried to be polite, and that went well.
Okay.
The next day was the last day, and the procedure, and it was early in the morning, 8 a.m.
Okay.
So I had to leave. It was in Southwest Paris, and I had to leave where I'm staying in Bastille at about, I think, about 5:45 in the morning, to get there on time. Now, for procedure, what they do is you get to draw the topic, as we discussed. And what I drew was criminal procedure, but specifically the administration of proof. So, in other words, how do you get things into evidence, whether that be physical evidence or declarations, etc. You then have an hour to go through the code. So I went through the code for an hour, made some notes, and then basically went into before the panel. As I said, it was the first one of the day. These guys were mean, let me tell you. The three gentlemen, and they immediately started in on me. So they first asked me to give my summation of how proof is administered in French criminal procedure, which I went through. And then when I finished, the guy told me my presentation was boring and that he didn't learn anything from it, and that I reached no conclusion. Um, and I sarcastically thanked him for his response, which I was told afterwards was not a good thing to do. But I also wonder what conclusion they wanted me to reach, because I wasn't given a fact pattern asked a question. I was just simply told to say how proof is administered. So I don't know what conclusion I was supposed to reach other than, and here's how proof is administered in criminal courts. So we then got into a big battle. And let me just tell you in advance, I ended up passing this part very solidly, because I
Oh,
walked out of
okay.
there thinking they absolutely hated me, and all my French friends afterwards told me they thought I completely messed this up, but I was very combative, and I guess that's what they wanted. Um, and if I argued with them, and in fact, he told me at one point, he asked me a question, I forget what it was about, and I said he was wrong, and he seemed flabbergasted, and I said, well, let me open the code and tell you. So I opened the code, and I read it to him, and it was actually in the jurisprudence, the case law following it, not the code. And he's so I was right that it was the law, but he just had to be right to say that, well, it was in the jurisprudence, not the actual
Oh, okay. Big distinction.
code.
Yeah.
We ended up the last thing the panel ended up arguing with me, asking me, was whether a defendant in a criminal case has a right to lie. And I said yes. It's not a right, but basically there's no consequence for him or her lying. And they were really challenging me, and I could not tell if I had gotten this wrong or if they wanted to see if I stuck to my guns.
Okay.
And I think they were trying to get me to stick to my guns, because I looked it up after and I had gotten it right. And in fact, I got it right because I listened to a radio show here in France called L'heure du crime, or the Criminal Hour, in which they talk. It's a very interesting show where they talk about criminal cases in France. And it seemed like just 2 weeks earlier on the show, I had heard a lawyer mention that that a criminal offender has a right to lie.
Oh,
So I'm
nice.
glad yeah. So remember that. Anyways, yeah, I walked out of there thinking they absolutely hated me, but I passed quite solidly that part. So that's how the exam was administered, and then I got the results about a month later.
Okay, we'll get to that in one quick moment. Okay. First of all, at the end, your whole exam was administered in a period of 2 days. You didn't go into the third day. Is that correct?
Oh, it was 3 days. So the first day
3 days.
was entirely the written exam, then the first oral part the second day, and the second oral part the third day.
Okay, excuse me. Okay. How did you feel at the end of the 3 days?
I felt run down. Glad it was over. I felt generally good, but it being my first exam in France, I didn't know solidly whether I passed or not. And also my first oral exams, really. Those were the things that concerned me most. But the written part, I felt pretty strong about.
Okay. And then when Mark, when you and I took the California bar exam, it was 3 days. It's recently been changed to just 2 days. Specifically from a fatigue standpoint, how did your experience with the French bar exam compare to taking the 3 day California exam?
I was more fatigued after the French exam, even though the second and third day were not full days. It was just that first day was long, and everything around it. So I definitely felt more tired after French bar exam.
Okay, got it. And then one other thing that we touched on very lightly, but is a really important subject, is you started to study in July. What did you do exactly to study during that period of time? Okay, because I remember talking to you, you were constantly adjusting and kind of, realizing what you thought you should spend more time on. So what did you do to prepare, and how did you find out what to do for preparation?
Taking the exam, first of all, my friend David, who Bismuth, who was an attorney in California first, or actually New York first, and then took the Article 100 exam here. He took me to bookstore and gave me some books, and then I just asked people, and then I started in on it, kind of like anything I do in life that I don't know exactly what I'm doing at first. I'll just start in on it, and then soon enough the path kind of becomes clear, and that's what happened here. So maybe there was at the beginning some work I didn't have to do, but it really left me, I think, with a solid foundation. So I started with the commercial law book, actually, and as I said, I read the whole thing, and I made notes. It was like a 360-page book, and I ended up with with like 110-page outline, which I had to get thinner. And then then I did bankruptcy law, and then the deontology, and I started to do the civil law and other subjects, and that's when I started to think it's better use of my time to use a lexifiche for that. In other words, are they already summarized um, notes? Because if I were to make my own notes from the textbooks, first of all, I'd never be done in time for the exam, and it wasn't even necessary for those things. Because again, I didn't have to memorize the law like we do for California. I just had to know what the law was and where to find it in the code.
Got it. So you focused, or you relied most on the Cliff Notes for the deontology portion. Is that correct?
No, deontology, I did it the legit way. I went through the book. There are no cliff notes for
Oh, I'm
deontology.
sorry. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I guess I totally misheard you. Okay, got it. And then what did you do to practice your oral exam?
So I had gotten a hold of some practice tests. For the oral exam. Well, I have a friend who was nice enough in California to go through and quiz me. That would be Parviz. We ordered some pizza, and then he ran me through all the tough questions in the oral exam. So you were a big help. I passed both parts of the oral exam, so I can credit
Oh,
you for that.
my pleasure.
Um, and then my friend David Bismuth in Los Angeles also quizzed me. And my friend Julia Gregoire, a French American living here in Paris, who's an attorney who really raked me over the coals. But that was good. That's what I needed on all the subjects. So uh, basically, roping people in to quiz me for the oral part was a very valuable, and something. It's obviously something I can't do on my study for on my own.
Right, right. And so let me ask you this: for the oral part, which you performed well on, how many hours total do you think you had friends quiz you in preparation?
Uh, about 5 hours.
5 hours total.
Yeah.
Okay, okay,
So it
great.
was two with you, two with David, an hour with Julia. So.
Okay, okay, very nice, nice. Okay, so now let's get to the results. Okay, you got the results 1 month later, right? What happened? What were the results of the exam?
I did not pass. And it was surprising because, as I already mentioned, I passed 3 out of 4 parts.
Mhm.
I got through both orals. I got through the conclusion, which was the part that was messed up. It was the commercial law part, the part that I left the exam feeling the strongest about, that I did not pass.
Mhm.
And it was a little mystifying to me because it's the first exam of this sort that I've ever not passed, and to do it on a part that I felt the strongest about, it was very odd to me. And anyways, I went into, and considering that I passed the other 3 parts solidly, so you had to get an overall score of well, it's hard to say it without explaining the whole French system, but basically get a about half the points on average. So The commercial law part was sufficiently low that it brought down my other scores,
Mm.
which was even weirder. So it's
Wow.
not that I just failed it; I really failed it.
Mm.
Um, in France, I was you're allowed to go into testing center and see the results. So I went in and looked at it. There was no model answer I can compare it to.
Mm.
But basically, went in there and I looked at it, and as I said, I wrote it up. It seemed well organized. There were subtitles, headings, all that stuff. And I couldn't. It wasn't perfect for sure, but it didn't seem like I should have failed, or if I did, by not that much. I asked for a rereading. They granted it to me, and then it was just honestly 3 days later. I came back in, and I looked at the comments from the second reader, and they didn't change my grade at all. And then again, it didn't seem like, again, it wasn't perfect, but I just couldn't understand why it was so low.
Okay.
And I'm mystified. I have a few theories, but um, given what I told you about how unprofessionally the exam was administered, I'm a little frustrated with the whole experience. I feel, given that I so solidly passed the other parts, that I feel like I should have been successful at this exam.
Interesting. Okay, so in hindsight, and I'm sure you've probably talked to your French friends about this, your French lawyer friends. What's the number one or top two explanations that you think? And we want to learn from this, obviously. And for anybody out there watching that wants to see, learn from any missteps, what do you think happened?
I don't know. Again, it was I didn't have a clear answer. There are a couple of theories. My French is not perfect, so maybe the grader of the exam that I failed did say that I hadn't yet mastered written French. But that said, I passed the other written part with no problem.
Right,
So
right,
what can I say? And the two oral parts. So
right.
I don't know. The other theory I have, and this is only my theory, and no one else has agreed with it, I'm wondering if, because they so badly messed up the whole part with the conclusion, that they had to pass everyone.
Say that again.
I'm sorry. I think I think we cut out for a second. Anyways, what I was saying was, I think because they so badly messed up that first part, the conclusion,
Hmm.
that maybe they had to pass everyone on that
Oh,
part.
okay,
And
okay.
that therefore, if they were going to fail anybody, they had to do it on the second written part.
Got it.
So therefore, maybe I didn't do so bad on that, but so that they didn't have 90% of the people passing or whatever,
Right,
they basically had to cut some people.
right.
I don't know. I mean, the third possibility is, hey, I could have just messed it up, but I don't know. Like I said, this is the first exam of this type that I've failed, so I think I have credibility to say I think I know when I've done well and when I haven't. So
Yeah, of course. And I know you don't go in there looking for a consolation prize. You go in there looking to pass. But obviously, it takes a
right.
ton of guts and gumption to even come this far. Um, we are right now in October 2019. In October 2014, exactly 5 years ago, did you know a lick of French?
No.
Okay. When did
Well, a
you
lick. I
start?
knew a lick. Yeah.
No, but when did you start learning French realistically, for real?
Well, realistically, I had 2 years of French in high school, public school, American education, which is basically nothing. But it was in earnest that I started learning French about 3 years ago.
Okay.
Um,
So about
and I worked really hard on it, and I made an effort to put myself out there and did as much writing as I could, did as much reading as I could, and so now I can get by in French and no problem.
Yeah, absolutely. You definitely can. So you basically started learning French effectively 2 years before you took the bar exam there, right?
About two and a half, yeah.
2.5. Yeah, that's incredible. And then, one other thing, I know that you did hire a tutor to look over your essays. That wasn't specifically essays
I'm
for.
sorry.
Can you hear me, Mark?
I'm sorry, Parviz, you cut out for a second. I don't know if it's on my side or your side, the bad connection, but what were you saying?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, that's fine. I'll edit that out. No problem. I know that you did hire a tutor that was helping you with your writing, correct?
Yes, I had a French teacher that I found on Italki, Benji Bach, if you want to find him, great guy, lives in Japan, originally French. And I've been using him since I started to learn French in earnest, which is almost 3 years ago. So when it came time to study for the bar, I used him to read over my written French and kind of quiz me, but he didn't really on the oral part. But he's not a lawyer, so he really didn't have the knowledge. He basically, we kind of did some other stuff, but he was very useful, I think, in making sure my writing's good and telling me honestly, how I was doing. And I asked him before the exam if he thought my written French was sufficient for the exam. He's like, "Yeah, no, you did a good job." So.
Nice. So would you recommend a non-native French speaker taking the French exam to hire a tutor to improve the writing?
Yeah, I had also heard too from a couple of people who took it and passed that they found hired tutors from some of the bar review courses here to go over the exam. I didn't do that, but that might be a good idea as well. There is a bar review course specific for the Article 100. There's only one at this point. I heard there might be more, and they charge 10,000 euros for the review course. So obviously, I was not going to do it. But I think if you were to just get a tutor to maybe look over what you're submitting, then that would be a good idea and probably only cost you, a few hundred euros, maybe 1,000 euros or whatever for his or her time.
Got you, got you. So you came close. You were unsuccessful in the March exam. Are you going to take it again?
I don't have any plans at this point. I think business is good for me in Los Angeles. I reserve the right to change my mind in the future. There were a few downsides to taking the exam here and being a lawyer here. And those downsides are that attorneys in France are restricted from doing most anything but being an attorney. There is some consulting work that I do. I also do some writing. And I would have had to declare that to the French bar and get approval to do that. Also, French attorneys make about half of what California attorneys make.
Mm.
But that said, clearly I would have liked to have passed. It would have been a great accomplishment. I'm disappointed that I didn't, but honestly, I'm not sure how much I needed.
Right, right. What was your initial motivation to take the French bar exam?
I do business law, real estate, bankruptcy. For the business law, I was trying to position myself to help American companies with European issues, or French companies with their California issues. So in other words, do some international business law. I've got connections here in the French community, French business community, French legal community, and I wanted to take advantage of that to help businesses. I mean, I could still do that, just not in the capacity of a French attorney. I mean, I can still help them with their California issues and, of course, their business issues in France. But for their legal issues, I would refer them to competent counsel here in France.
Got it. And did you still you kept up with your French, I assume?
Yep, I'm in Paris now and speaking French mainly with the people here, and I love the language. I love the culture. Every day I usually listen to podcasts, the radio in French, and I read a lot in French. French literature I adore it. So.
Nice. So if anybody watching this has any French legal issues in California, legal or business issues in California, or California business issues in France, of course, they can contact Mark, and we'll put your contact information in the video description. Mark, before we advance to the lightning round, which is the last part of the interview, what's the #1 piece of advice you'd give to somebody who's a foreigner that is interested in taking the Article 100 exam in France?
Talk to as many people as you can for advice. Get as many different points of view and figure out what works for you. If you can afford the bar course, which is really expensive, take it. I understand they've got a good pass rate, but
Okay.
otherwise, your advice is going to come from other counsel who did this.
Okay, great. Again, I've told you this in private. I really commend you for taking the bar exam. It takes enormous guts and effort. You came very close, but it's nothing to be embarrassed about. That you didn't pass. And I'm sure that if you take it again, you'll probably sail right through. So I think you should actually take it again.
Thank you.
My 2 cents.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciated all your help in studying as well.
Oh, I mean, I didn't do anything. And by the way, thank you for also coming on and, doing this video, even after, not getting the result that you wanted. I can
Sure.
imagine, that again takes even further guts. So great. Congrats. Let's continue on to the lightning round. I got a few questions just about Mark Whites to see what type of guy you are. All right.
Okay.
So, first one is dogs or cats?
Dogs.
Okay. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Netflix or cinema?
Cinema.
Croissant or bagel?
Oh, croissant.
Croissant. Okay. Of course. You're in France. Okay.
Yeah.
Favorite country to visit?
France.
France. Okay. We're staying consistent, huh? Favorite movie?
2001: A Space Odyssey.
Okay. And finally, iPhone or Android?
iPhone.
All right. There you have it. Mark, thanks again for coming on. And
My pleasure.
Thanks.